Hi, welcome to an unusual review and an unusually difficult review. So it's unusual in a couple of ways. One of them is that normally my reviews start off with I have just finished this book. This book is not in fact this book, this is two books. So my normal rule, I suppose, of one review, one book is vanishing for this one. There's a few reasons for that. But the other thing is I haven't just finished it. I finished it back in March, a while ago now. I didn't get to reviewing it. There was some stuff happening. I was a bit busy. Also, this is the first time I've read both books one after the other or read the whole book as one for a long time. I really love this books. And at the end of having finished it, I probably wouldn't be much good at doing anything review-wise other than gibbering at the camera about how wonderful a book it is and how you should all read it. I stand by that. It is a wonderful book or wonderful books, and many people who love science fiction and fantasy should read it. However, so let's start with James Blish a bit, but not too much, because James Blish as an author is one I've talked to about a fair bit. I've got a fair bit of Blish. I've read a lot of it. I enjoy most of his work. He was an incredibly influential science fiction writer in his time. He was also a reviewer as well as writing SF. He had a biology background, which means that he was one of the first SF writers to actually include biology, because traditionally you'd had the harder STEM sciences of astronomy, maths, engineering type, physics and so forth. So the fact that he incorporated biology into his science fiction was new and exciting. He also did something else exciting in combination with, I think it was Damon Knight. He started holding science fiction writers to the same standards of literature that other writers might be held to. He wanted them to have good grammar. He wanted the science to be accurate. And I'd say that was very influential in the field in many ways. I'm not the only person who says that. And I'm just a bystander, but that's my opinion. Now, Blish was an extraordinarily widespread interest sort of guy. And one of the things he was interested in metaphysics. So the questions of the questions involved in religion, as well as the questions involved in the occult. So the whole range of metaphysics, not just one. And that was the most important feature, really, of his trilogy, After Such Knowledge as It's Known Today. Now, when I first read these books, it was back in the 80s. There was no internet. I had no idea that they were meant to be part of a trilogy. However, the internet these days assures me that they are. And that the After Such Knowledge includes, first of all, A Case of Conscience. I think that came out in 1964. I read that book last year or the year before, and I'm pretty sure I reviewed it. It was very influential and started a whole new field, in that at that point in time, not many science fiction writers were actually addressing religion per se and as such, and they certainly weren't targeting Catholicism, whereas A Case of Consciousness does very much look into the question of secular knowledge and its influences. Does the acquisition of it or the misuse of one's mind count as evil? Is evil an actual thing? That's A Case of Conscience. After that came out Dr. Mirabilis. And that, I believe, came out in 1971. I have never read it. I've never found it. But it's a historically set fiction with an occult background that, as I understand it, leads into Black Easter. Now, Black Easter is also called Forced Aleph Null. Not that I've ever seen that. And I believe that came out in 67 or 68. Whereas The Day After Judgement, which is the next one, came out a couple of years later, a year or two later. And I think that was first published in one of the magazines, maybe Galaxy. Any case, the internet also assures me that Blish considered both of these books to be a single book. And they are both quite small. They're novellas. They're at best. They're the sort of thing that you would put out in a magazine back in the day, in the 60s and 70s. And altogether, they would still be a fairly small book. So Black Easter in this edition has got 130 pages, but that has got quite widely spaced. And my Old Penguin original book is 118. So, what are they actually about? Now, Black Easter... Actually, let's talk about the books. Black Easter, I have just recently acquired, which is why I just read it. This edition strikes me as possibly being what I've seen some people online calling a print to order. The cover is by Vince Haig. I don't know who Vince Haig is, but the cover rather suggests to me that he's never actually read the book and doesn't really know what's in it, though he knows the title. It's brought out by a company called Valancourt Books, whom I have also never heard of. My other copy, however, I have had since I was a teenager. This is an Old Penguin. The artwork on it, which I don't believe there's any credit to the or artist in here. If there is, I'll put it in the comments. But beautiful artwork when you consider that it was personally done by an actual artist and not a graphic design program. Not perhaps entirely relevant to anything in the novel, but it could be a demon, right? Old copy, it's still got numbers on the spine, which you can't see too well. Originally, back in the day, I had both Black Easter and The Day After Judgment, and I read both of them. In one of my many moves, when I was trimming down my books, which I now deeply regret, I gave away Black Easter but kept The Day After Judgment because this was has always been my favourite of the two, which is odd because most online sources claim that this is everyone's favourite. It did win at least 2 awards that I'm aware of. I think a Nebula was one of them. And yet, I still... It's a hard sell. One of the reasons why I think they work well as 2 books and not one is because they are very, very different. Some of the characters from here carry over to here, but in actual fact there are extra characters in here that never appear in Black Easter, and the narrative style is so different. It could almost have been written by a different person or be about a different subject. This time reading them, I loved them both equally, with the ability to recognise the fact that they are 2 different books. The internet once again claims that these 2 are the 3rd book in the trilogy After Such Knowledge, which includes The Case of Conscience, Dr. Mirabilis, and these 2. In the 80s or in the 90s, they were published as a single novel called Devil's Day, and that might be why, for decades, I could never find this one. I so regretted getting rid of it. This one I've read far more times because I've had it for all these years, and when I wanted to, I'd reread it, always mourning the fact that Black Easter wasn't available to read first. And now, finally, after all these years, I have read Black Easter, and then The Day After Judgment, the way they're meant to be read. I thoroughly recommend that. So, in the introduction to my Black Easter copy, there is a little bit of an author's note from 1968. And in it, he makes a few points. One of them is that there have been a great many novels, poems, and plays about magic and witchcraft. So, and apparently in the late 60s, most of them had been either romanticized or comic playful type ones. These days, of course, we have many more. We have the never-ending romanticing, where anything that's metaphysical has to be young adult. However, now as then, apparently most of them were very fantastical. The characters, the events, the rituals, if they exist, came from the product of the author's imagination. And Blish, being interested in actual metaphysics and being a bit more perhaps of an academic, didn't do that. What he did was he read a whole heap of documentation, mostly from the Christian tradition, but I think from others as well. 13th to 18th century, he read things that were, as he calls them, pseudo-keys of Solomon, pseudo-Agrippa, pseudo-Honorius, and so on. So he read actual grimoires, and he used actual names of actual demons that are mentioned historically. A lot of the rituals in here, I believe all of them, are actually ones that are described. And so what that does is it gives this book a beautiful air of reality. Now, in this world that Blish is giving us, sorcery and black magic, as well as white magic, are real things that really work. They're not generally necessarily acknowledged, but they are systemized. Systemized, is that a word? And so everything in here that Blish had researched, he goes into great detail when things are actually going down. Now, in this book, I should also mention that the character names are very much puns in themselves. They are, in a way, named after Blish's fellow science fiction writers, according to the internet. Yes, anyway, so we've got a number of main characters, and I'm not going to really give you too much from the actual book or its progression. We have got a father, a main character who is a monk. He is a monk in a particular tradition where white magic is practiced. And so he becomes involved in this book when there's a compact between the white magicians and the black magicians of this world. And when Father Domenico's order becomes aware of some heavy black magic happening, he is sent to be an observer. And that's how he comes into this book. This book, in fact, has a very small set of characters. You can almost count them on one hand. A very small scene. And the narration seems almost simplistic at times because the narrative is so very, very linear. You don't have a lot of jumping around. You don't have a lot of other things happening. It's all very focused. Chirp, chirp, hang on. I, too, have a small demon that needs placating. So, small demon. Yes. Sorry about that. I'm still no good at editing videos. You're just going to have to bear with bird time. Now, so we've got that white magician, Father Domenico, who becomes an observer. Our main character magician is Theron Ware. He is apparently named after another book in which an actual character is damned. But in Black Easter, he is considered the foremost, most powerful, best known black magician of his time. He is a powerful character in what he can do, but he's not really interested in doing powerful things. He's got his own, he's an American, we're told, by birth, but he's living in Italy in a villa where he practices. And he enters into the story when Baines, I think it's Baines, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, steps in. Baines is a warmonger, basically. He is a very, very wealthy man who has made his fortune selling arms to whichever country happens to be buying them and promoting wars wherever he might be able to sell arms. He's not on his own in that. He's part of a huge company, a conglomerate who do that. Early on in Black Easter, there's an entertaining little bit where we hear that Theron Ware, that Baines has become a little bit bored in that the development of thermonuclear weapons has meant that war sales have gone down. That's certainly a bit funny in 2024 or 2025 when we know that nothing of the sort has happened. Baines has a couple of employees who come into it. Jack Ginsberg, who is a secretary, who is an interesting character in that his main interest in life is chasing women, but he's never entirely satisfied by the relationships. So he is, most of the time in this book, he becomes fascinated by a succubus who is an employee of Theron Ware's, and he keeps him quite busy. that part is written in an interesting way too, because once again it feels very much like Blish has gone into reading up on what the succubi and the incubi were and how they operated. It all comes across as very realistic and very, very interesting. The other character is Dr. Adolf Hess. He's a science officer in Burns' company, and he's brought into this because Burns essentially wants to ensure that what's happening is real. And that's where we start. Burns employs Theron Ware to assassinate a few people using magic, and he wants proof that it's happened. He basically wants proof that black magic is real. And Theron Ware provides that for, we gather, a very large sum. And having done that, they move on to the really important thing. The important thing is Black Easter. Burns is so bored with his life that what he wants is for Theron Ware to release all the demons from hell onto Earth for one night to do whatever they like, just basically to shake things up and make himself less bored. I think that when I was young, I didn't love that character plot too much. I thought it seemed unlikely. As an older and more cynical me, I'd say that very wealthy men who have spent their lives doing something like selling arms and promoting warfare probably would get just that bored, and if black magic really was as systemized and reliable and part of the nature of the universe the way it is hypothesized to be in Black Easter, someone probably would do that. Now, the fact that that's what Burns wants to accomplish isn't enough to have it done. Theron Ware says that essentially you can't do that and it wouldn't work, but he releases a large number of demons to go anywhere in the world overnight. The pacing of this book is different to what you would see in a more modern book. We see lots of books where you've got that very, very straightforward narrative that we've got here. We wouldn't see too many books that are written quite like this. I've also seen James Blish criticised as not having female characters. The only female character in this essentially is a succubus. So I don't know that this would satisfy the Bechdel scale in any way. It is Bechdel scale, I think. Anyway, Black Easter finishes on a high note, which isn't really spoilering it because it's been out for a long time. Dawn has come after the night of the devastation of the earth, with all the demons running free on it, doing whatever they like. And before the dawn had actually come, Theron Ware tries to recall the demons, only to be told that God is dead. He can't recall them, and that's it. At free on earth. And his last experience, their last experience of all of them, is with a particular character called Pat Satanica, which is a monster Bahamut as well. It's a goat-like demon. God, apparently he's pretty high up in the ranks. No one ever summons him, but he's just appeared, and then he looks at all the assembled. He eats one of them, and then presumably taking them straight to hell, and then says he'll be back for the others. And that's where this ends, with a devastated world in which our few protagonists are waiting miserably to see what happens next. The day after Judgment is quite different. You've got a lot less linear narrative. You've got lots of time and places as our characters scatter to do different things. And we've got a more real day scenario in that all of Black Easter occurs basically in Theron's villa where they're summoning demons, or briefly in Father Domenico's convent where they're talking about what might happen. Here we have English. We have a number of different locations and scenarios. We start off in Theron Ware's villa, which has been wrecked. The Italian town that used to exist below has been eradicated by a tidal wave. His workshop has basically been eradicated and buried under mud as well. So that's a bit of a problem. And they're left adrift in a quite incredible way, because all the methods of summoning demons, all Theron Ware's power rests on demons and demonology and summoning and black magic, all of which rests on the metaphysical universe in which you've got heaven and hell in opposition with each other, God and the devil as opposing forces. And without that basis, he doesn't know if any of his magic will work, and some of it seems not to. All of the agreements that he's sold his soul and his entire life on, making these bargains and agreements with demons, probably none of them have a basis either. And he's hesitant to try anything because anything that he does might be fatal to him. So early on, Father Domenico heads back to his convent. Convent? That'd be nuns. No, to his monastery to find out what the white magicians are doing. Theron Ware is thoroughly sick of Bairns and his assistant and wants them to leave, and eventually they do, because as part of that release of demons on Earth, nuclear warfare has been declared. Huge amounts of America and China and other countries now no longer exist. One of them is the Vatican. The Vatican has been bombed into non-existence. Online they say that that is against Catholic mythology. I don't know too much about Catholic mythology. The beauty of these two books is that you really don't have to enjoy them for what they are, but it might spark your curiosity to find out more about metaphysics, Catholicism, occult, or whatever. Theron Ware is left alone when Bairns and his assistant catch a plane to America, where they believe one bunker has probably survived. And this one, The Day After Judgment, feels far more science fiction-y than this one. This is essentially a fantasy scenario in an alternative version of our world where magic is real and so are demons. This one is far more post-apocalyptic. We've got the real world, or an approximation of the real world, in which huge tracts of it, in fact most of it, has been devastated by nuclear strikes. In The Day After Judgment, Bairns goes to this location in this nuclear-proof bunker in America, where the general is probably in charge of the United States, which he isn't really suited to. And they find out that in Death Valley, a structure has emerged. And that structure is essentially hell come to rest on Earth. But it's come to rest in an unusual way. The general, being a military man, tries to attack it with military forces. Theron Ware's turned up, and many of those military forces are ones that he's supplied. A plane flying overhead has a Catholic navigator on board who comes back traumatized, babbling about this, and they think he's babbling. He's not. He's saying that's the city of Dis. And it is. The way Blish has written Dis on Earth is fascinating. You've got the circles of hell. You've got beautiful, beautiful imagery. I don't know if anyone's ever read Dante. For an early science fiction lover, I think Dante is well worth reading, but he is a bit tricky. This is less tricky. It's far more accessible, at least for the era in which it was written. So that's the 60s. 70s. 60s and 70s. Thereabouts. But yes, so if you like occult, anything, I would say that these books should almost be a must read. They're not somehow, they don't seem to be as famous somehow as Edgar Allan Poe and the Cthulhu's, but honestly, if you like that type of occult mythology, James Blish did something really quite extraordinary here. This is turning into a long video. And I haven't really gone into what's in these books. Okay, oh yes, the Day After Judgment, I think it's got one more female than the other one, though the Succubus demon still appears. Who is this for? Anyone who's enjoyed any James Blish, I think you're going to find that this is even better than what you enjoyed. If what I've said about it so far in any way intrigues you. If you've read A Case of Conscience, I think that going on to this one will be fascinating, because A Case of Conscience is wild in a very mild sort of way of wild. It's concept based. Here, it's very concept based, but the actual events are bizarre. Even in today, in 2025, when we've had so much more occult, so many more black magic-y type media than you had in the 60s and the 70s, this still takes it to what I would call a whole new level. And the actual writing is beautiful. As I said, this one feels like a real system. You will sometimes see in fantasy reviewers, people will say that they didn't like them because the magic system isn't well explained. I do not believe that there's any magic system anywhere in the world that is better explained than what you get in Black Easter. And the fact that Blish built it on real books and real names and real events just makes it more gnarly and so much more detailed. There is so much detail in a book this size. What there isn't is a lot of moving forward in the plot. It's about magic. And this is about what happens after magic has occurred. Is it spoilery to tell you what happens in the end? Maybe. Maybe it is. But I'm going to do it anyway. So if right now you are going out there on the internet and looking for these two books, stop now, read them, come back and watch the last, 5 minutes. So the punchline of Black Easter was God is dead and the demons are free on earth to do whatever they like, which is a pretty big punch in the guts right there. But the punchline for the day after Judgment is even huger. The punchline for this is that God may or may not be dead, but he's absent. And in the absence of God, there has to be a God. And so, in fact, the devil, or put satanica, and I don't really understand how the two are different, to be honest, but they are forced to assume the mantle of God. Now, if that sounds familiar to you, it's because that is a thing that has been done by a number of other writers since, and somewhere behind me you will see the Sandman books. It's been done there as well. The Day After Judgment finishes on a note that no modern book would dare. Basically, it finishes on verse, where you've got the demon, or put satanica, or devil, or whatever, who has is in the process of assuming God's role, and he talks in verse. Now, tell me of anyone, modern person, who would be able to write verse. All mankind, not spelt as we would by the way, all mankind in a night's abyss, only for perverse aesthetic joyce and thrill of mastery. Then there ensued that universal war, in which the victory hath feigned to hellish host. So we rejoiced, yet hold, for once released from pains, decreed to be forever, all of our band of demons foul, who once were angel bright, conceived in simpler time, and ever since, entombed amidst the horrors of the pit, did find the world of men so much more foul, even than the fabulous reign of witches. And we could keep going. It is gorgeous. I could read it all to you. And it is essentially Paradise Lost by Milton, which I have not reviewed on the channel, though I read a couple of years ago. Paradise Lost by Milton, it was Milton's attempt to create a mythology that was purely Christian, because Milton recognized that most Christian mythology is essentially borrowed from other mythologies. He wanted to create an epic poem that was Christian mythology, and he did. It is quite extraordinary and very difficult to read, but I did. And that is how Blish ends his Day After Judgment and Black Easter story. It is phenomenal. It's absolutely amazing. And probably not for everyone. I would say that these two books, probably the first one, anyone could read this, but by the second one, you're probably reaching a book that you need to have read Black Easter to understand the Day of Judgment After Judgment, but you also need to be able to have a subtle reading background. You need to enjoy the subtlety, enjoy the narrative for what it is, and you need to be able to enjoy epic verse to really revel in that end the way I did. I loved it when I was a teenager, and I understood less than a quarter of what I understood 10, 20 years later when I last read them in combination. And now that I am old and cynical, they are even better. They get better with every read. So thank you very much for listening to me rave. I tried not to rave. I tried to give information. I might even redo this video next time I reread these, which probably won't be too far in the future, because they are excellent, and I recommend them to any serious person who's interested in occult and black magic. I recommend them to anyone who seriously loves James Blish and this particular 60s and 70s era of science SFF, classic SFF, because essentially no one else has done what Blish did in these books. Thank you very much for watching. Read good books, whatever takes your fancy.